All right, so we are back again talking about how to deal with people, and so in this video lecture, we're going to talk about motivation, and specifically, and trying to zero in on the idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators and what they can kind of mean for us in terms of how to understand people better. So let's start with what is concept of motivation. Motivation is generally, in kind of a broad sense, the psychological forces that compel someone to take action. So it's the kind of the calculus that goes on inside of our brains that says, all right, this is what I'm going to do. So looking at any kind of scenario is like, what are you motivated to do? Are you more motivated to get out of bed and go for a jog in the morning? Or are you more motivated to stay in bed where it's possibly warm and comfortable, right? So how are all those things kind of balanced against each other and that kind of psychological calculus that goes on inside of your head? And so certainly for us, as we think about how to deal with people, is understanding how they are motivated, how they come to the calculus of what is the best choice for them, that kind of pro and con list. So, again, why do we care about this? It helps us understand why people act the way they do. So, certainly, as we're talking about how to deal with people inside of workplaces, if we're in a manager position, kind of understanding like what we need to do to help convince people to do the things that we need them to do, but even like looking at coworkers, right? What motivates them? Like, how do we get them to act the way that we want them to? But also, how can we kind of emphasize with them or empathize with them a little bit, right? How can we understand why they are doing the things that they're doing? Certainly, if we go back to the some of the previous modules, looking at collaboration and teamwork, looking at inappropriate and appropriate behaviors at workplace, looking at conflict management, the concept of motivation kind of helps us understand some of those things, right? When we look deeper at a person and go, well, they're not doing something that seems irrational, insane because they're a lunatic. They're doing it because they are motivated in the way to do it, right? The way that they see the world and the pros and cons about this set of behaviors makes sense to them. And so, kind of one of the things that can help us in dealing with people is to take the time to try to think about that, right? To unpack that black or to unlock that black box of motivation around people and understand how they see the world. And so, one of the simplest types of ways for us to break down motivations is into two types, right? And this is very commonly used in the public in understanding workers in the public sector. And so, the first type is what we call intrinsic motivators, and these are the motivations that come along with performing an activity as a reward in itself, right? Is when you do something because doing it just makes you feel good, right? You want to do it because you want to do it. And then the other, as compared to the other type, was the extrinsic, in which performing an activity is a means to achieve a separate reward, right? You do it not because you really want to do it, but you do it because it will get you something else. And so to break these two things down a little bit, let's think about like a job, right? So, an intrinsically motivated people might take a job because they really want to do the job, right? They really want to teach, they really want to serve people, they really want to, do environmental cleanup, they really want to work with pets or animals, that kind of stuff. An intrinsically motivated person takes a job because it gets them a paycheck, right? They don't really care as much about the type of work. The work itself doesn't make them necessarily feel great, but it does get them the paycheck. It does get them a separate reward in something that helps them, right? That they ultimately want to achieve. Now, this is to say that nobody is completely intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. Typically, we see a mix of these within every type of person. So, for example, for myself, there are parts of my job that are very much intrinsically motivated, and there's parts that are very much extrinsically motivated. So, I mean, there are certain things around here, say, for instance, teaching that I do because it's a reward into itself. Like, I enjoy doing it, it's fun for me, it's great. Like, I do it, boom, I'm motivated to achieve those things. But there's other things around here that are extrinsically motivated for me. I don't really want to engage in them, but I understand that doing it gets me something else, right? So if I kind of sit on this committee and kind of deal with all the headaches that go along with it, then maybe I can get paid a little bit more, or maybe it gets me a favor for somebody else. Maybe there's a trade off, right? So I'm not really doing the activity in order just to do it. I'm doing it to get something else out of it, right? And so, what we largely expect out of people, and a lot of the theoretical models will suggest this, is that we self select into jobs and organizations, into relationships, into basically situations that match our internal structure and incentives, right? So, is to say, if I'm really intrinsically motivated, only sort of extrinsically motivated, I'm likely to self select into an organization that gives me a job that matches up with that. And so we end up seeing conflict. We end up seeing dissatisfaction. We ended up seeing frustration when the things that we're getting, the types of incentives that we're getting out of the people around us don't match up with what's going on internally for us, right? So if you take somebody that's very, very extrinsically motivated and you put them in an intrinsically motivated job, right? So maybe that they really want a big paycheck, but what they end up doing is a job that is really rewarding and fulfilling just for the purpose of doing its job, like say social work or teaching, they're going to be really dissatisfied at work. They're going to be really frustrated and all of that, right? And so balancing these type of things out ends up being extremely important as we kind of try to unpack what's going on here. So big question, which is best? Well, it depends. And that's a big exclamation part there, right? So there's not necessarily one set of things that are better intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. There's not something that is normally not one is not normatively better than the other, but we have to think about these in terms of like, what is the best way to go about motivating somebody, right? So if you look at, employee X, right? Does getting them to do their job better, right? Do we need to give them an extrinsic reward? Do we need to promise them that, oh, wait, if you do this, we'll give you a raise, we'll give you more vacation days, like this might lead to a promotion, or are they more intrinsically motivated, right? Is how to get them to work harder is to remove some of the institutional barriers to allow them to do the part of their job that they want to do better, right? And so let's think about maybe a university professor, right? If they're really intrinsically motivated and what they want to do is teach, and that's the part of rewarding, maybe the way to motivate them to be better at their job is to allow them just to do all the teaching, right? Is allow them more time in the classroom and more time to engage in all that, right? So they'll be so much better at that part of their job. But if they're more extrinsically motivated, well, that's not really the way to go about it, right? If they don't really care about the teaching part, they're not going to be better by engaging more in it. We have to find something else to motivate them with. And so really what this comes down to is thinking deeply about what motivates people, like what kind of psychological forces compel people to act in the way they do. In your readings this week, we're going to kind of unpack the idea of motivation a little bit more, and particularly as it comes to intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. But generally, as we kind of think about this, it's important to think about this both as it applies to us individually and as the people around us, right? So what motivates you? How can we structure that motivation? How can we create those motivations for ourselves so we can achieve the things that we want to? But how can we also do it for other people? So, right. So when we talk about how to deal with people, it's important for us to understand not only what motivates them, but what motivates us. Why are we in situations? Why have we put ourselves there? And how can we use this to our advantage to, again, get to those positive interpersonal relationships, those positive organizational outcomes for both us and everybody around us?